Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. In this lecture, we're going to write an API GET request method that retrieves all of the to-dos that we currently have in our database. This is awesome as our application is starting to come together and be a real-life application. Now to do this, the first thing we need to do is create a new function right under models.base.metadata.createAllBindEngine. This function is going to be called getDB for getDatabase. Inside the getDB, we're going to have a try and a finally where we create a session of our database, and then we close the database regardless if we get the session or not. We can create this function by saying def getDB try, and then inside the try, we will say db equals session local, yield db, finally db.close. Now it looks like we need to import our session local. So we just hover over this and we can say import session local from database. When we do this, session local will be added at the end of database and right after engine. And now we can rename this create database to read all. And now as the parameter, we need to now use dependencies. And how dependencies work is we want this function to execute, but it depends on the solution and execution of another method. So how we can start working with dependencies is up in FastAPI. Right after FastAPI, let's type in depends. And again, remember, depends stands for dependencies. And after our depends, we now need to import one more thing. So from SQLAlchemy.orm, we need to import session. We now need to pass in a parameter of db, which is of type session, which equals the dependency of our getDB function that we created. We can do that by typing in db session equals depends and as a parameter getDB. So now when this read all functionality gets executed, this will get executed after the getDB method gets executed and we create a session that we can work with within our function. This session is going to be inside db. So from here, let's just type in return db.query, and then as the parameter of query, we want to say of models.todos.all. Now let's open up our terminal, make sure you're in your virtual environment, and now let's cd into our to-do app. And now let's type in uvicorn main:app -- reload. And now let's open up our Swagger UI and refresh the page. And here we can see immediately all of our to-dos. Let's hop over to our docs. We have our read all functionality in API, which takes in no parameters. And if we say try it all out and execute, we get our curl execution of get at our URL and port. And we get our response body of all three of our to-dos within our database, which were go to the store, cut the lawn, and feed the dog. This is awesome. So we just created our own application and API that communicates with a database. So remember, We enhance this functionality from create database to read all. We're saying we need a new parameter of DB, which is of type session, which depends on getting the DB. The reason we created the DB with a try and finally is that whether or not we get a DB instance or session, we always close the database. And then we return our DB session .query, which is our way for us to write a query within our application so we can query our database. And we're saying of our models.todos table, let's return all records. This is awesome. Now that we created our first API, let's keep going and create APIs for all different types of instances for our to-dos. This wraps up this lecture, and I will see you in the next video.